Beloved is the word people whisper when they remember a Christmas movie that somehow felt like family, like warmth, like safety. Even as the years moved on and life grew heavier, beloved is how those faces still live in our memory, frozen in laughter and chaos, while time quietly took its toll behind the scenes, carrying secrets, sorrow, and final goodbyes no one was ready to face. When Home Alone first lit up theaters, it didn't feel like a movie. It felt like a moment the world shared together, a rare breath of innocence in Hollywood's loud machinery. The house was bright, the jokes were simple, and the heart of it all was a child left behind. But off camera, long after the applause faded, that laughter aged, cracked, and in some cases, went silent forever. This story isn't about box office numbers or trivia. It's about what happened after the lights went down, when the cameras stopped rolling and the actors returned to lives that would never again be that easy, that joyful, or that protected. John Hurd, the gentle father trying desperately to get home, carried a quiet intensity that made him feel real, flawed, human. Friends later said he struggled with being remembered for one role when his life was filled with many, some triumphant, some painful. In his final years, illness crept in quietly, the way it often does, stealing strength while the world looked away. Those close to him spoke of regrets he rarely voiced publicly, about time lost, about family moments that couldn't be rewound like a VHS tape. When he passed, it wasn't on a grand stage but in stillness, leaving behind a role that would outlive him. Robert's Blossom, the terrifying neighbor who turned out to be the loneliest man of all, carried his own shadows. That soft smile at the end of the film hid decades of theater work, personal solitude, and a life spent mostly out of the spotlight. Those who knew him said the role touched something deeply personal, a reflection of being misunderstood, judged from a distance. His final days were quiet, his passing barely noticed by a generation that once feared him, then loved him, then forgot how fragile he truly was. And then there was John Candy, whose brief appearance stole hearts without anyone realizing it would be one of his last gifts. Behind that rapid-fire humor was exhaustion, pressure, and a heart that had been pushed too far for too long. He made people laugh, even when his own body was warning him to stop. When he died suddenly, the shock rippled through Hollywood, leaving behind unanswered questions, unfinished conversations, and a haunting realization that sometimes the funniest people are carrying the heaviest burdens. Even the smaller faces, the neighbors, the relatives, the background characters who made that world feel alive, carried stories the audience never heard. Some faded into obscurity, some battled illness in silence, some died long before social media could remember them. Their families watched as a single holiday rerun brought their loved ones back to life on screen, smiling, shouting, existing in a moment that could never change, while real life moved forward without mercy. Home Alone became a tradition, but traditions can be cruel. They freeze people in time. They don't show the hospital rooms, the strained marriages, the loneliness of aging actors waiting for a phone call that never comes. Behind the warm music and slapstick comedy were human beings growing older, feeling forgotten, and in some cases, preparing to say goodbye without knowing how much they still meant to millions. Beloved memories can be cruel because they don't age the way people do. While the film stayed young, the cast carried the weight of being recognized everywhere for a moment that no longer reflected who they were becoming. Macaulay Culkin's face became the symbol of childhood itself, and with that fame came a pressure no child should ever have to survive. Behind the scenes, adults argued, contracts were signed, expectations piled up, and a boy who once screamed in playful terror was suddenly surrounded by silence. Those close to him later spoke of exhaustion, confusion, and a feeling of being trapped inside an image he never asked to wear forever. Hollywood watched, judged, and speculated, while he quietly tried to find out who he was without the cameras. Catherine O'Hara, the frantic mother whose pain felt real because it was performed with truth, once admitted that the film followed her in unexpected ways. She became a symbol of maternal panic and devotion, yet off-screen she saw friends and colleagues struggle as the years went on. She attended funerals that never made headlines, quietly standing in the back rows, remembering shared laughter between takes. She carried the grief of watching familiar faces disappear while the movie kept reappearing every December. Unchanged, unscarred, unaware. Daniel Stern, whose physical comedy made children laugh until their sides hurt, later spoke about the strange emptiness that followed massive success. To guarantee peace. There were moments, he said, when the phone stopped ringing, when relevance felt like a fragile illusion. He watched as Hollywood moved on, as newer faces replaced older ones, and as the industry showed how quickly it could forget the people who once made it billions. Some nights he wondered which version of himself people actually loved, the clumsy villain or the quiet man behind him. For the younger cast members, the journey was even more complicated. Some stepped away entirely, choosing ordinary lives over constant scrutiny. Others tried to stay, only to realize the doors closed faster than they opened. There were whispered struggles with addiction, identity, and mental health, stories shared only among close friends, never confirmed, never denied. The price of childhood fame wasn't just lost innocence, it was a lifelong echo of a moment everyone else wanted to relive, even when the actors themselves couldn't bear to look back. And then there were the families. Parents who once stood proudly on set later sat in living rooms watching reruns with mixed emotions. Pride tangled with guilt. Joy collided with sorrow. Some wondered if they had protected their children enough, if they had listened when the smiles faded. Others carried the pain of watching a loved one become a memory for strangers, while still being painfully present at the dinner table. Hollywood connections deepened the weight. Names like Chris Columbus and John Hughes hovered over these lives like ghosts, their creative brilliance undeniable, yet their absence felt heavy when guidance was most needed. When Hughes passed, many from the Home Alone family felt another quiet break inside, as if a final link to that moment in time had vanished forever. Time kept moving, as it always does, pulling some toward healing, others toward tragedy. The laughter grew distant, replaced by reflection, regret, and questions that would never fully be answered. Legendary moments often hide the deepest wounds, and for the Home Alone cast, time revealed truths that no behind-the-scenes featurette ever dared to show. As the years passed, the silence around certain names grew louder. Actors who once shared the same set slowly drifted apart, not out of bitterness, but because survival sometimes requires distance from the place where everything began. Phone numbers changed. Christmas cards stopped coming. And with each passing year, the realization settled in that the magic they created together belonged to a version of themselves that no longer existed. Robert's Blossom's passing hit some harder than they expected. The man who embodied fear and tenderness in the same breath had lived his final chapter away from the noise of Hollywood. Those who visited him spoke of fading memory, of moments when he struggled to recall faces, but never forgot the feeling of being loved by audiences, even briefly. His last conversations were quiet, filled with reflections about loneliness, about how life can reduce a man to a memory unless someone chooses to remember him. When the news broke, there was no massive tribute, just a quiet acknowledgement and a return to holiday reruns, where he still stood tall and whole. John Hurd's death reopened wounds that never fully healed. Friends admitted he carried the weight of unfinished apologies and words he wished he had spoken sooner. There were family tensions that time never repaired, moments of regret that followed him into his final days. In private, he reportedly spoke about the strange sadness of being most remembered for being a father on screen while struggling to hold things together off-screen. His last years were marked by illness and isolation, a stark contrast to the frantic, loving dad audiences adored. John Candy's absence lingered like a shadow over the entire cast. His energy had filled rooms, his kindness remembered as genuine, not performative. Those who worked with him recalled how he gave more than required, stayed longer than necessary, and laughed even when exhausted. His sudden death became a warning, whispered across Hollywood sets, a reminder that success does not negotiate with health. Some cast members admitted that, after he passed, the film no longer felt entirely joyful. Every laugh carried a trace of sadness. Behind closed doors, some cast members struggled with darker paths. Fame faded, opportunities dried up, and the emotional crash that followed left scars. There were nights of self-doubt, days of wondering whether their best work was already behind them. Therapy sessions, private breakdowns, and silent battles became part of their reality. The world saw nostalgia. They felt survival. Families carried their own pain. Children grew up watching parents relive their youth on television while quietly mourning what was lost. Spouses stood by hospital beds, holding hands as machines beeped softly, knowing the world would only remember the smile, not the suffering. Last words were spoken in whispers, promises made that couldn't be kept, and love expressed but too late to change the ending. And still, every year the movie returned, untouched by grief, playing on screens around the world, as if nothing had changed